Marguerite Willis is wildly accomplished, yet she starts her conversation with me by saying, I do have the best of stories and worst of stories to share. She is a trailblazer in her field as one of the first women partners in a large law firm in Washington, D.C., and has run for the governor of South Carolina, started a Women's Leadership Institute at her firm, founded the Women in Philanthropy nonprofit, is an accomplished and sought-after speaker, and she is also a fabulous storyteller. Marguerite has a natural way of weaving some of the painful life and money lessons that she has learned into frank recollections of her colorful journey. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
Marguerite, you've been remarkably candid with us with your story. I would love for you to share your personal journey and also your own unique money story.
Well, thank you, Tess, and it's great to be with you here today and with everyone listening to this program. I do have, I would say, the best and the worst of stories to share. The best of stories is my professional story. I started out over 40 years ago in law school with just a few women who were entering law school at that time, and I managed to, through hard work and opportunity, to become the first woman partner in a big firm in Washington, D.C. And I've been back here in South Carolina practicing law for almost 20 years and been very successful in the practice of law. I've been the president of the Women's Bar Association of the District of Columbia, as well as the president of the Women's Bar Association here in South Carolina. I've been one of the leading partners in the law firm where I work here today as well. So I've had a very successful practice and a very successful career. Contrast that to some of the problems I've had in my financial life, because while I was being successful and earning lots of money, to be honest, as a lawyer, I managed to marry a fellow in the mid 80s who had, I thought, lots of money. He had a big fancy house. He had a Rolls Royce. He had a ranch in Wyoming. But it turns out after about 13 years of marriage, I found out that was not the case. The big mistake I made was not marrying him because there were lots of good things about it. The big mistake I made was giving him all my money. I actually gave him all of my cash flow. I gave him all of my assets, and I just thought, well, he would take care of me because after all, I'd grown up in the South, and I really thought that a man would take care of me, not just physically, but financially. So I minimized my own worth, my own earning potential, and turned it over to someone else. Well, the story had a sloppy and unfortunate end. Turned out that he had an affair with a waitress from a local restaurant who lived in our house for a year and a half while I lived in Washington. He lived on the eastern shore of Maryland. And when that all came to the surface, we had a very nasty divorce. Nasty in the sense that we had a lot to sort out. And that's when I learned that he'd forged my name to bank documents, and he otherwise really put me in a terrible position. Now, for the ladies listening out there, I was not penniless. I didn't have any children, so I didn't have any of those terrible problems to sort out. But I did have an 8-carat diamond ring, which I took immediately and turned into cash. I got a safety deposit box in a bank and put cash in there. And I lived out of a safety deposit box for about 4 months because I didn't have access to any other money. I'd given it all to him. As it sorted out, it was a hard lesson for me, but one that I actually needed to learn. And so I, in retrospect, feel that I was lucky to end the relationship not penniless, but with the lesson that I had to take care of myself financially. And that's what I've done for the last 20 years.
Well, thank you for sharing such a deeply personal story, Marguerite. And it sounds like you're in a much better place now. You mentioned the phrase that kind of struck me. You said minimized financial worth. And I know that you give presentations quite frequently and talk about women's worth, not only in general as individuals, but also in the workplace. Could you talk a little bit about that and what it's been like for you in real life or in the corporate world as it relates to inequity, changes, differences in compensation, what obstacles you faced and how you have overcome them?
Well, we all know, Tess, that across the country and across all occupations, women earn about 80% of what men earn at the same position. In other words, if I'm a lawyer of a certain level and there's a man who is a lawyer who's of a certain level with regard to time and service or professional success, I'm going to earn 80 cents for every dollar he earns. Now, that doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference if I'm a brain surgeon or I'm a housekeeper. That's the differential. Now, if you make $1 million a year and you're a man, and a woman makes $800,000 a year, that's a 20% differential. That's hard to really say, well, gee, I should make $1 million. I'm hurting at 800,000. But if you only make $60,000 a year, then as a man, and the woman makes $48,000 a year, well, that's $12,000. That could be a house payment for someone. It could be a car, buy a new car, or to help out with education for your children. That's a real differential, and it is set into the payment scheme across the board in every industry. The way I have managed to push against that and to rise to a point where I make as much money as my male colleagues is simply to bring in clients. Because in the practice of law, if you have clients, then you have revenue that you generate, and then you have value. I have demonstrated my value through my performance, but you cannot do that in every industry. And so we have to work, and this is what I talk about so much, we have to work to equalize value. And we have to pass laws that say no matter what your sex, you're paid the same amount of money for the same work. It's called pay equity. And it's one of my biggest desires to see a pay equity law enacted both across the federal arena and also here in the state of South Carolina, just as in every state. Until we do that, women will not be able to be valued the same as men. And that is the key. And that's what I talk about a lot as well when I speak to women. It's a question of value. And part of this is on us because we don't value ourselves as much as men value themselves.
I'm very glad that you are working on this a very important issue. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit more about the historically male-dominated industry that you have worked in. And do you have any thoughts or can you share anything about experiences you had as a young attorney walking into this highly male-dominated industry and how you kind of dealt with that?
Well, I've got 100 stories, maybe 1,000 stories, and we don't have enough time for those because remember, I started practicing in 1974. Now, people listening to this, hopefully there's some who weren't even born in 1974. I was almost always the only female lawyer in the room. And I started to practice law. And when I ended up in Washington, D.C., there were places in Washington where meetings were held that I could not enter because of my sex. Women were not allowed in some of the private clubs. And so I couldn't attend meetings. So that's had to change just in my career because talk about being excluded, or if you want to refer to the musical Hamilton, being in the room where it happens. If you can't get in the room where it happens, there's no way you'll ever be able to be as successful as someone who can. So that was initially just a bar for me. As time passed, part of it is experience, part of it is just being mean and snarky because I had to do some of that too. But part of it, I think, for me, was trying to be who I was. I never wore like a little suit with a Brooks Brothers tie like women used to. I always dressed the way I felt made me feel comfortable. And years later, people have told me you were such a role model for us because seeing you operate in a certain way, dress in a certain way, conduct yourself in a certain way, we felt that we had the liberty to do the same. But it wasn't easy. And a lot of it was me just making it up as I went along. There were not a lot of female role models for me. I did have a lot of men who helped me, who recognized that I had some talent and they wanted to promote me. And to them, I will be eternally grateful. But as we've all recently acknowledged and seen, the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg was such a blow to people like me who saw her as such a model for us. She wasn't that much, she's not that much older, or wasn't that much older than I am, but still she was ahead of me in this profession and someone who I could look to and model my behavior after. And it's a real loss for us. I think as the profession matures and as more women come into the profession, we will hopefully see more equality and more opportunity for women. But we can't have that discussion without acknowledging the fact that women disproportionately, disproportionately carry the burden of children. And that's true in the workplace, it's true in the practice of law, it's true across every profession. Again, brain surgeon or housekeeper at the motel, it doesn't matter. Women disproportionately carry that burden. And we need to make adjustments in the workplace to accommodate that. It's very important that we recognize it. Matter of fact, let me just say, all of us, I'm sure, who are looking at this program today have our own stories about the current pandemic and our own struggles, wherever we are, whatever our life is. But I have seen personally the young women in my law firm struggle the most in my circumstances, the ones that's my observation, because these folks are working from home sometimes because of the virus. They're also having to homeschool their children. They're having to make sure that they are able to be kept fed and taken care of and educated, and they're practicing law under the demands of making sure you hit your billable hour targets. It's incredibly difficult for them. And I fear that when we come out of this pandemic, be it next year or the year after, whenever the effects, the tailing effects of it are over, we'll see that this period of time has held women back because we are not at the place where our colleagues and men, particularly, are willing to compensate folks, women, for these efforts that they put in to raise all of our children. Because I don't have any kids myself, but every child is my child. Every child who needs an education, every child who needs a meal, every child who needs medical attention is my child.
I wanted to focus or shift the focus a little bit more to personal wealth. And I know that you use a quote often, all things being equal, money is power. Can you speak to how that plays to women and a woman's perspective, whether she is single, in a marriage, corporate executive, whatever type of woman it might apply to?
Yes, I do say that all things being equal, money is power. I don't say that. Let me just say that I believe that. I also say that money is independence, because I think that's another way to say it and somewhat more accessible to people. That money is independence. Here's my personal story in that regard. I grew up in a household where my dad worked and my mom didn't. It never occurred to me, as I've said before, that I would actually have to work for a living and support myself. Again, I thought I would marry a man who would take care of me, hence my story about giving all my money to my former husband, because I thought if I gave it to him, he would take care of me. I was wrong about that. But I grew up in a family where my grandmother had inherited wealth. And she used to say to me, you know, Marguerite, my money is independence. And I saw my grandmother use her money to reach out and support charities that she cared about, her church, for example. I saw her be accessible to political figures. I couldn't understand why she could call the senator and he would call her back. I couldn't understand why the governor knew who she was. It was because she had money and she donated to their campaigns. So her money was her independence. Later in my life, I came to understand as well that having money allows one to be independent. Now, I'm not talking about huge amounts of money necessarily. I'm talking about enough money. And every woman, every person ought to have enough money that they can protect themselves, not just take care of themselves, but protect themselves. Because we all have heard stories about women who were in abusive relationships and they couldn't leave because they couldn't support themselves. They had nowhere to go. Perhaps they had children and they were stuck. If you have money, your own money, then you have independence. You can leave. And everybody, every woman needs to be able to know that if it gets to that point, they can go. They can go and they're not going to suffer unduly. And that's why every woman should have their own money, because then they have the power to control their own life and to be independent. And let me just tell you something, ladies, whoever's listening out there, maybe the guys, men actually like women with money, not because they can buy them a boat or a car, although you could do that, but because it gives you strength. Everybody who is strong is attractive. So if you're worried here about seeming like you're too tough or too strong or too masculine because you have money and you take care of your money and you support causes with your money, you're just wrong about that. It makes you attractive to everyone because it allows you to move and perform and live from a position of power.
Could you maybe give any of the listeners or anyone that's watching this video some practical tips on how to make sure you are independent? Maybe you're not right now, and how do you get there?
Well, the first thing you have to do is to get real about it. The first thing you have to do is take stock. You have to literally look at your bank statement. You have to literally know how much money you have, what your assets are, what your debts are. You got to pay off your credit cards. You've got to get real. So that's first. The second thing you need to do, and I believe this is true no matter whether you don't have much money or you're not earning much money yet, or whatever your circumstances, you need a good financial advisor. You need someone who will be honest with you and help you develop a plan. Whatever the plan is yours to develop, but you need to have one and you need to stick to it. And you need to get educated about money. This is not that hard. I know a lot of women who just don't want to deal with it. They think it's too difficult. It's really not. You can scan the headlines in any major newspaper. You can get anything online these days. You can watch the stock market, which, by the way, is not the economy. So let's just put that out there. It's a different thing. But you can be educated financially. And think about it. If you're not educated financially, then you can't engage in a financial conversation really with anyone, not one in depth. You can't understand your own circumstances. You can't know what's best for you. And remember, the basic premise here is you take care of yourself, because if you can take care of yourself, it's like putting your oxygen mask on first. They always tell you put yours on first so you can help other people. Same thing. You have to take care of your own financial circumstances. So if you need to, you can care for your mom and dad, for your kids, for your spouse, for your old dog, that's me, who has lots of medical bills. But you have to take care of yourself first. And so you need to understand this. You need to be educated, you need to get real, and you need to have someone who can help you in this process. Because hopefully, as you're responsible with your money, as you grow your investments, someone will be able to tell you how you even improve your hand in that regard.
And would you also, what is your thought on separate bank accounts?
Well, 100% separate bank accounts. Now, it may not be, for example, when you talk about separate bank accounts, we immediately go to marriage, and I think that's incredibly important to have separate bank accounts. But you may just have a roommate or a friend or a partner. You should keep your money separate. It doesn't mean that you don't contribute to some joint expenses. It doesn't mean that you don't have obligations that you satisfy. Indeed, your conversation with your partner, be it your spouse or whoever, is a very important discussion. And it is what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, and then we'll jointly decide what we do together. So my husband and I follow that rule. I give him money every month for household expenses because he has someone who pays bills, who does that work. But I know what it is and what it's for because we've talked about it. This is kind of funny. We recently had an anniversary. It wasn't a big one. So I bought him a new chair for the porch and he bought me one. So I just wanted 2 new chairs. So we each bought each other a chair. So I got what I wanted and I got 2 of them, but that's the way we did it. And I think he appreciates that. And I know I appreciate that. And it allows me to have what's mine and keep what's mine separate. It doesn't mean that if anything ever happened to my husband, he knows that I would take care of him, and I know he would take care of me, but I would do it as a matter of choice and not as a matter of desperation. So I'm a big believer in separate bank accounts. My mom did this. Now, I told you a little earlier that my mom did not work outside the home, but my father gave her an allowance, and I watched her put that money into an account, and it was always hers. She would say that was her money. And that was the money that she very carefully controlled. And there was always a little extra money in there. If you needed a new pair of shoes, I noticed this. It was a new pair of shoes that came out of mom's money. And so it was very important to her. And it gave her a modicum of independence. And in retrospect, as an adult, I look back and I think my dad helped with that. He gave her some money that she felt was hers, and she always treated it that way. And it became her source of power in that relationship. My grandmother, who I mentioned as well, who was independently wealthy, when she would give away stock every year, which she did, to my dad and his two brothers, she would also give some to her daughters-in-law. She gave some to my mom and my Aunt Sue and my Aunt Libby, because my grandmother knew that if they had their own, they would be more independent. And she valued independence. And for that, by the way, I'm named after my grandmother, Miss Marguerite, as they called her. But I think that was a lesson that she didn't teach it as much as she lived it. And that has been important to me.
Yeah, it sounds like these are very important lessons learned through generations in your family. And I didn't know you were named after your grandmother. So thanks for sharing that. I wanted to ask you just a couple more questions. One of them is, if you were looking back at your younger self, whether it was when you were in the marriage that didn't work out or any other age, with the experience that you have today, what would you tell that younger woman that was just embarking on a career or going through a difficult marriage?
I'd tell her good luck, for sure, and tell her that you can look at me and know that it may not end up badly for you. There are bumps in the road, and you have to take in a way what life presents to you. A lot of things about health and this pandemic we're in the middle of, you can't control. But what you can control is being honest with yourself and looking at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm worth something. I'm valuable, and I can't let people treat me as if I'm not valuable. But most importantly, I must treat myself as if I'm valuable. And I've got to take care of myself. No one else is going to do it. I say when I talk to women, here's a news flash: Prince Charming isn't coming. No one's coming for you on a white horse. No one's going to take you away to a castle. You're going to have to live your own life and build your own future. I would say that, and I'd also say have a good time, And I would say, as I always do, and I brought it with me today, I would always say this: buy a good pocketbook. And the reason I say that is because you got to take care of yourself, but you also have to acknowledge in this world that people will make judgments of you. And if you're going to be serious about your financial situation, about money, then you have to act seriously about it. So if you have a good pocketbook, it's two things. One, for people who are going to look at you and see what kind of pocketbook you carry or what kind of shoes you wear, you have satisfied them that perhaps you have some means and you've had some modicum of success. But the second thing is, by carrying a good pocketbook, you show that you respect money, because it's a place where historically we've kept our money. And so I'm a big believer in that. So I'm giving everybody permission out there to go and buy a good pocketbook. Now, I brought one that's an understandable, logo today. I don't always carry that bag. I have others that I carry. But I'll tell you a real quick story. I know we're probably running out of time. The speech that I often give is called "What's in Your Pocketbook?" And I gave it one time over at the University of South Carolina. Years later, I was on a plane talking to a young woman sitting next to me. At the time, I was running for governor, so I was giving her my political spiel. And she said, "Do you ever speak at the university?" I said, "Yeah, I have on occasion." She said, "Do you talk about finances?" I said, "Yes." She reached under the seat of her airplane seat, and she pulled out a red Tory Burch pocketbook. She said, "I bought this after I heard you speak." She had gone out and bought a really nice pocketbook for herself. And I was so pleased with that because I thought, there's someone who has understood what I had to say. Now, that doesn't work for everyone, but for some people it does, because you're presenting yourself in a way to show that you have some resources and you have some power, and that other people are judging you on some of that. Now, I would be remiss by not finishing that thought with, it really is what is inside that counts. And when people get to know you, they should judge you on what's inside. Are you good of heart? Are you kind and generous? Do you do the right things under the worst of circumstances? Those are the things we ought to be judged on. But in fact, in a moment, in a snap, people are going to look at you and make some judgments. So carry a good pocketbook.
Well, I definitely like the pocketbook that you showed us, and I definitely understand that first impressions are so important. So I think that's excellent advice, and I'm glad you coupled that with what's inside is what is really important. But in reality, people do look at you and look at what your attire is and what your
Yes.
pocketbook is. So
Yes,
thank you for that. Before we conclude, do you have any final tips that you would like to give to any of our listeners, financial or otherwise? Anything you wanted to share that I didn't cover?
Let me just say this, and it's sort of repetitious, but maybe not. And I want to speak directly to the folks who are listening to this. You're valuable, and you need to act on and respect your value as a woman. We have a ways to go with regard to society recognizing our value, but we have to not give up. We have to make sure that we are as successful as we can be in our own circumstances. And that means everyone needs to understand their finances and take care of their financial condition and future. Because the day may come when you have to take care not only of yourself, but of others. And you need to be prepared for that moment. It's not a scary thought if you're prepared. It might be a sad thought, but it's not a scary thought. No one needs to be scared in this world unnecessarily, because when you have money, you can help other people. You can help other people get an education or get a meal or get a decent place to live. We can be good folks when we have money to use to be good folks. So think about that here today. And I hope you'll internalize that message, because no one needs to be afraid of being a valuable person. And one way to become more valuable is to respect and take care of and grow your money. So again, get some help if you need it, get educated, and just get real about it.